politics and history, well, it's required, right? If you're going to move beyond the level of talking about a book like you're at a book club and talk about a book like you're a serious literary scholar, it requires you to have this historical and social and political background. Now, lastly, I would like to look at Mohsen Hamid's first novel, Moth Smoke. Has anyone read this one? Moth Smoke? All right, he's more famous for his second novel, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, right, which was made into a Hollywood movie. He's a terrific author, so if you get a chance to read Moth Smoke, and also his third novel, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, he's great with experimental narrative points of view. The sections of Moth Smoke are written in second person. The entire novel, Reluctant Fundamentalist, is one long monologue, right? When other characters' actions are described, it's one character saying, "Oh, I see you're reaching into your pocket to get your wallet out," right? And his third novel, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, is all in second person narration, right? You, the reader, become the central character in the story. Now, Moth Smoke is an example of an allegorical reading that is suggested by the author. Right, this is going to be heresy for some. Looking to an author's suggestions for interpretation may be anathema to some scholars, but I do think it has a place in literary interpretation. Now, this is not to ascribe some special and exclusive status to the author's suggestions for interpretation as the only valid ones, but they can be helpful. For example, in addition to Hamid's suggestions, which I'll elaborate on in a minute, I also see the novel as operating in a distinctly noir mode. He looks back to film noir from the 1930s and 40s in America and also in Germany and France. And this noir mode has implications for interpreting character relationships and the ultimate political argument of the novel, which is something Hamid never mentions in his interviews. Right, so I'm working on an essay to hopefully it'll be published in a couple of years, so look for my name and Mohsen Hamid Noir. In an interview in Newsweek International, Hamid claims that his central character, Daru, even though he descends into drug sales and drug use, represents the fundamentalist in Pakistan's context because he has only one interpretation, right? And that idea of one interpretation is sort of the principle behind fundamentalism. He has only one interpretation to his strained financial situation. Right? I can't work at the bank anymore, so I gotta sell drugs. Right? Similarly, Hamid claims that his antagonist, Ozi, or Aurangzeb, represents the entrenched westernized elite who use their American or European educations to enrich themselves through corrupt business practices. Hamid's suggestions also require students to see the validity of his interpretations within Pakistan's socio-political context, specifically the late 1990s when the novel is set. These interpretations are available through paratextual research, right? You won't know about these interpretations if you don't read the interview with Hamid. And that highlights the importance of stressing quality research, even if it's not from peer-reviewed scholarly journals, in a pedagogical context. You know, Newsweek International is reputable. They're not going to publish something that's a lie, but it's not PMLA, right? Now, both of these allegorical interpretive strategies, the textual and the authorial, require us to show students how to move beyond the literary text into the socio-political realm. Furthermore, they suggest that Jameson's theory of the national allegory is not necessarily the only allegorical interpretation available for post-colonial works. Right? So just like the Christian allegories of the Middle Ages, when they read on multiple allegorical levels, you can read for psychological allegory, you can read for the existential philosophical allegory, and you can also read for the social, political, or national allegory, as Jameson calls it, in addition to the literal reading of the words on the page. Furthermore, Kerouac's example shows us that it is not only post-colonial texts, which are, or only the post-colonial text, which is available for allegorical interpretation, as Professor Prasad has argued. In any case, allegorical interpretation must be grounded in a specific cultural context, and sometimes intercultural, as the size existential allegory shows us. Right? The existentialists originate in Europe and find their two biggest adherents in French, right? Camus and that other guy. Kafka, right, thank you. So Camus in France and Kafka in, Kafka, I don't know why he flies out of my mind all the time. It's a very Kafka-esque thing to do, right? And Kafka in the Germanic context. The task of the careful pedagogue is to provide his or her students with the appropriate intellectual tools and point to appropriate methods of finding resources with which to make these allegorical interpretations. I'd like to end by thanking EFLU. I hope I got this right. I would have put Urdu up here too, but I don't have Arabic script on my computer, so sorry, Arabic speakers or Urdu readers. I'd like to thank EFLU for hosting us again this summer. This is the third time that we've had an exchange program with our students coming here and taking classes, this time with Dr. Nikila and with myself. And I'd also like to thank the Department of English Literature and Mr. Mir Islam, who's been the most gracious host this whole time, for inviting me to give this talk. Sadly, we're almost done with our visit. Right? We're going to leave this weekend and head out to Delhi and Agra and then come back next week and have 2 more classes and then back to the US. But I hope that we can continue our academic dialogue in the future and that with further exchanges and make presentations like this one a regular feature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for
You're
the
quite welcome.
enlightening talk.
Thank you.
Now the floor is open for discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
One thing I've noticed, while you're thinking of questions, one thing I've noticed in American academic presentations, the question and answer tends to be kind of with kid gloves, right? And I've noticed that here, when I've come to presentations in India, the gloves come off. So take your gloves off, right? Attack me if you wish. Please do. I appreciate the criticism.
It's not a question, it's a doubt.
A doubt. Okay, good.
See, does the concept for national allegory exist in non-colonial experience? Does it exist in non-colonial experience? I mean, the literature that comes from a country or nation which was never colonized and hence away from this post-colonial experience or post-colonial discourse. How does the function of this national allegory, or what are the features of this national allegory, especially in the context of non-colonial experience?
Right. This is why I stated. Oh, thank you. This is why I stated that the term post-colonial is a very problematic one. Right. First, because of the post. I include Tagore, but he wrote before independence. So does that mean he's not a post-colonial writer? He critiques the notion of, or he criticizes British imperialism in his works, and even in his non-literary works. And then, what about in the era of globalization, right? Paul Jay, one of my PhD exam readers, recently made an argument in the most recent book he published in 2013 that we're now in a post-colonial situation. But the colonial, right, I think is what you're getting at. This also can present some problems, because would you consider the United States a post-colonial zone?
I mean, it depends on the context.
You're right, yeah. Well, the United States used to be a British colony, right? So some people do consider it post-colonial in the strictest sense of the term, but in terms of geopolitics, by no means is it a post-colonial place. I think, in answer to your question, to the original question that you had posed, the national allegory it can be present in places that are not post-colonial, but it's going to be of a different flavor, right? It will be of a different character.
For example, he comes from Turkey, right? It was never colonized.
Right, yes.
Like his works, they do pose certain amount of questions to very conceptual nationalism and suspense.
Right, yeah.
I'm curious to know.
Yeah, and here's where one of the things that we focused on in my class this semester is the way in which the political allegories can be interpreted as nation building. The reason why Jameson, that third world term he uses, is he was writing at a point when the Cold War was still active. Right, the choice of newly independent nations, whether to go the route of socialism or to go the route of capitalism, that is a question of nation building. Now, that's not, your economic model is not the only question about nation building. There are other questions that are incorporated. So in the post-colonial context, the national allegory is going to be read a little bit differently because there is that history of being colonized by another culture, the cultural influence, and possible questions about cultural hybridity when it comes to the citizens of those countries. Right? If you're born an Indian citizen from an Indian family and you go to a school that teaches you English and you read Shakespeare or Chaucer, and you are brought up on the same sorts of literary and cultural materials as a child born in London, are you Indian? Are you English? Are you both? Right? Whereas in the United States, for instance, the context would be very different in terms of, say, African American texts. Native Son is a good example, where questions of how the African American fits in with the larger political order as an oppressed minority, even 100 years after the end of our Civil War, when ostensibly slavery and oppression were abolished on paper, but it still requires us to have leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in the 1960s. And even to this day, there is still cultural and social and political and economic oppression of African American minorities. Right? So what we're kind of working towards here is the requirement of the context. Right? When you read for a national allegory, whether it's for nation building or for the status of a minority or for economic questions, the historical context, right? In many cases, the long historical context requires you're required to ground your reading of the allegory within that particular historical context, and that will necessarily change the allegorical interpretations based on which nation state you're looking at. Did that answer you? Good, okay. I'm always afraid that I go off on a tangent and don't answer the question I was asked, so. Any of you guys got a question? You're like, oh no, we've done the national allegory.
So I guess that's it for today. On behalf of the Department of English Literature and the entire and the University of and the English and Foreign Languages University, let me thank Dr.